If you have not watched the elimination matches of Worlds yet, be sure to go watch them and come back to this video, because what we're about to talk about has to do with the two teams that are already eliminated from MSI 2024 and have gone home. Got it? Those two would be the LLA and the CBLOL. Estral and Loud, both gone. Didn't win a single series at the event. For the LLA and Estral, it was honestly kind of expected. You're in a group against T1, you have PSG, and you have FlyQuest in your group. You are clearly the odd duckling out. There was no chance in my mind that they really kind of overcome this obstacle. It would be one of the biggest Cinderella stories we'd ever seen in LoL Esports if they found a way to qualify out of that group. But to go out in the way that they did kind of sucks, not gonna lie. They didn't win a single game, just straight up 0-4. For the CBLOL, I would argue even worse given expectations. Expectations at this point are not that they're gonna like do anything or qualify out, but at least that they'll be competitive. I mean, their viewership numbers are getting up there. Their money that they have in the scene is better than most of the other smaller regions, and yet they just can't seem to do it. They lose to the VCS, who, by all means, if you were to ignore everything else, if you were to just look at last Worlds to this MSI tournament, you'd say, okay, that's actually kind of expected. Vietnam's actually looked good, but again, the region was plagued with a betting scandal that basically wiped out half the players from half the teams, including Gam in this situation, who's playing with two players who just stepped in during playoffs. The region wasn't allowed to like consolidate the remaining talent left. They had to go find substitutes. So this was the result that you got. And Loud nearly beat them, but then they choked, fell apart, and now Gam moves on. That's embarrassing. Being on, like, you are not going to get a better chance to beat Vietnam than what you just got in this tournament, in this moment. And I don't know if it's ever going to happen if you can't do it now. But the question is, how bad truly is it? Like, how bad actually is the current scenario for the LLA and the CBLOL on an international scale? Because by all means, again, CBLOL at least is doing decent domestically. Their viewership numbers are great. I don't know how the money in the scene works, but let's look at the tournaments themselves. Going back to the old group stage format in 2022, you notably have the right candidates from CBLOL going 2-4 and not really standing a chance. I mean, I guess I shouldn't really say not standing a chance. PSG talent wasn't that far ahead of them. And then for the LLA, Team A's, yeah, I mean, it wasn't even close. Detonation Focus Me was notably above them. And the important thing to start calling out here is that when you look at some of the teams that are in these wildcard qualifiers, Detonation Focus Me no longer has a spot at international events. They are now folded into the PCS as they consolidate the region, consolidate power. Istanbul Wildcats, no longer a region. Order, no longer a region. So in theory, if you eliminate the teams, or at least the regions that no longer have teams going to Worlds, they're still the bottom two remaining. Worlds 2022, you have Isurus and Loud. Isurus for the LLA, Loud for CBLOL. And then you once again look at the teams below them. Istanbul Wildcats, no longer there. Chiefs Esports, no longer there. Beyond Gaming and the PCS, they've leveled up as they've continued to get teams with them. Detonation Focus Me is even further up, but they're now folded in with Beyond Gaming and the PCS. It's like, it's not good. It's not painting a good picture. These teams are just consistently towards the bottom, and with everybody else below them, it's only getting worse. 2023, same story. LLA, last place. Detonation Focus Me, no longer there. Flying Oysters, no longer there. Wait, is that right? No, I'm wrong. Sorry. Flying Oysters is the PCS. So, bottom 2 out of 3 again. MSI this year, now last. I think you get the point. It's not good. They're not improving as time goes on. They're not able to close the gap between them and not even the major regions, but just like the PCS, the LCS. I'd say like we are the two gatekeepers ultimately of minor regions stepping up, and they're not making any progress against any of us in any way, shape, or form, which is going to be a problem long term, regardless of how your domestic viewership is. There was a caller on Hotline League the other day that called in and asked, why don't we have that third international tournament just be like the Western Hemisphere and then like the Eastern Hemisphere, and like separating out the two different areas to try and give smaller teams a chance to play more games on the scale, to level up, to play their next closest competition, which would allow them in theory to close the gap better than any other method would allow them. Because if they keep playing against the top teams in Europe and the top teams from China and Korea, yeah, they're gonna get blasted every single time. Not that the LCS is doing all that much better. And while this sounds fun, I think the stakes are too low. And I also don't think it aligns with what Riot is trying to do long term. Think about this. Would you rather have a tournament between CBLOL, the LCS, the LLA as like a Western thing that qualifies then to MSI? Or would you rather just have that be the domestic leagues? And I know the second I say this, there's going to be people that come to me like, oh, you're astroturfing. You're trying to eliminate other regions for the sake of the LCS. No, I'm not saying that for the sake of the LCS. I'm saying Riot Games has made it clear that they want regions to be able to compete internationally, and they do not want China and Korea to just be 1 and 2 the entire time. And unfortunately, these wildcard regions, the smaller ones, and even the bottom of the LCS, like, is it worth sending them to international tournaments at this point versus sending a 5th seed from the LPL or a 5th seed from the LCK that could potentially cause an upset and make a run there? If we're being honest, and when you look at where the viewership is, especially for these international events, Riot is going to start favoring them more and more and more. As much as it hurts to say from an LCS fan point of view, from an LLA fan, from a CBLOL fan, we do not matter as much as some of the other regions. And when you look at what other esports are doing, you see them, specifically Valorant, consolidating as much as they can to try and bring the power level up as much as they possibly can so that you have as many resources that can push each other to be better, given that we currently have no ability to scrim China, scrim Korea, scrim Europe without ping being an obnoxious problem. We have not solved that yet. The day that that becomes irrelevant, then sure, we'll be able to scrim Eastern teams and the gap will actually start closing. But we have to pull in as many resources as we can to make it better. But I know the counterpoint is going to be, especially from CBLOL fans, I think this is a valid argument for them, not as much for the LLA. What about the domestic leagues? Are you really just getting rid of years of culture, of heritage, of everything else that was kind of set up there? And my answer is always this: yeah, you got to do what you need to do to survive. For the LLA specifically, it's not like their viewership domestically is great. Like, they're not in a good spot. The news this week is that they're actually losing another team in their league just because it's not sustainable. Like, they didn't sell, they didn't get money for going elsewhere. They literally just straight up left the league, and you're down to 6 total teams in the LLA. So why would you not at that point just say, okay, from what I've been told on Twitter, there's like 4 teams that actually have decent funding for now, but that funding will eventually dry up if you don't have revenues to make this a sustainable product moving forward. At what point do you say, okay, it is time to merge with the LCS? Even if they get 4 teams in and we have, say the LCS drops 1 more team, because by all means we could probably afford to given some of the brand. Say you make it 10 teams with 6 LCS and 4 LLA, or, you know, if you want to do 7 and 3, perfectly fine. You at least keep the LLA intact. Because when you look at what the PCS is doing right now, and they're very much consolidating Japan and all of the and Oceania and pretty much everybody into that system, it makes sure that you at least have something to live on. But the problem with the PCS system is that those teams only get in via a playoff spot. So in reality, you're still playing against worse competition the entire year, and then you just go into a playoff system to get absolutely slaughtered. If you're the LLA or CBLOL, like, and you want to improve, you need to be playing against the best teams in your hemisphere consistently, not just in playoffs. So sure, you can argue to keep the domestic leagues, but I would say if you want better competition, if you want to level up as a region, you need to be playing against each other the entire time. For CBLOL, they have the money, they have the resources, they have the viewership, at least relative to like their cost structure down in Brazil. To my understanding, I don't know if it's just mismanagement or what the hell is going on there, but the fact that they have the viewership numbers that they do and they can't use any of the money that exists in the scene to be able to improve it all is kind of mind-blowing, if I'm being honest. I'm not even going to suggest CBLOL becoming a subsidiary or like a group of teams within the LCS, because I know Brazilian fans freaking hate that. I'm not trying to piss them off. I will say this: I wouldn't mind there being like a Brazilian or like a South American conference to the LCS and then a North American conference, and then we play like a few weeks of inter-region matchups, and then kind of like how the MLB does it, where you play teams within your division, teams within your league, and then you have a few weeks where you play teams from the opposite league, and then otherwise you won't see each other until the World Series. You could do a similar thing here. But all of this sets up an even more important question that we're about to get answered tonight, which is FlyQuest versus PSG. You have the LCS as like the standalone region, the gatekeepers more or less, and then you have this team in PSG that is right on the outside of the gate looking in. FlyQuest beat them 2-1 the first time around, but I always favor momentum coming from the losers bracket up. Am I predicting PSG to win? No, absolutely not. Don't get me twisted. But we should be worried because the PCS is that region that once again shows that like they're consolidating power, consolidating resources as time goes on, and the LCS continues to stand alone, but we're getting our power slowly chipped away at. If FlyQuest loses, we have massive problems. I'm just laying that out there now. I don't think it's going to happen, so I'm not panicking about it. But after watching what happened between T1 and FlyQuest, mental needs to be reset pretty quick. But that's also emblematic of the bigger problem, the reason why this whole topic is a point of conversation in the first place. It's like the gap is so big between the East and the West. It's massive. It's monumental. It's almost impossible to overcome unless we can somehow pull all of our resources together. And I know people are like, oh, but you lose the individuality of regions. Sure, but Riot has made it bluntly clear that it is not acceptable for China and Korea to be dominating everything. That is not a sustainable product long term, and eventually we will get carved out and fans will stop caring when you get the same results year after year after year after year in an ecosystem that prioritizes international play. And no, don't come at me with the whole, oh, well, we need to deprioritize international play. That's never happening, ever. So adjust your philosophy to think, how do we get the other regions to be on par internationally? And one of the steps that comes with that is consolidation. As tough as that is to hear, we're just in a bad spot. Like, we really are, especially like the LLA. I don't know what the answer is going to be, but I can promise you it's probably not going to look the same next year as it does right now. If I had to put any money on it, they're getting consolidated into either the CBLOL or the LCS, one of the two. Not a doubt in my mind. As for CBLOL, y'all got to figure out something.